and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, and I have a treat for you today. It is not an author that we are talking to, but someone who is very heavily involved in books. Her name is Jessica Tseang, and she is a comic book historian. Coolest title ever, I know. Like, I want her job. We talked about a lot of different things, including comic books and history and what even her job entails. So much ground that we covered in this conversation. So without any further ado, here is Jessica Tseang. We're finally getting to meet in person.
Yes, very excited. We met during the pandemic.
Virtually.
Virtually.
So you were talking at that point about Indigenous comics. And
yes.
So you got to hook me up with talking with Taboo for the news.
Yes.
What is it like getting to work with like these epic writers and artists in the comic world?
It's really, really incredible because when you start out, for every beginning, you never think that you would meet like Mark Waid or Grant Morrison. And then when you meet them, you hope that they're as nice as you think they are. I've been very fortunate to have the opposite of never meet your heroes because Mark Waid, Jeff Johns, Grant Morrison are very nice. And what's great about comics is, yes, you have to be able to write comics very well, but they're always looking for diverse talent. So Taboo was doing, several comics over at Marvel, and I was able to reach out to him in order to cover Indigenous representation in Marvel and comics and just pop culture in general and how that's going, because it's growing now. Because it used to be like Columbus Day, now it's like Indigenous Peoples Day in certain cities and certain states. And he always kind of performs, and he's always doing, a lot of like, I wouldn't say activism, over and like the South Dakota pipeline and everything. So I know that he not only is a pillar in their community, but also loves pop culture. So to be able to interview him and be able to be on the same panel with him, it was virtually. It was like 2021 or 2022 or something. No, 2021, because 2022 Comic-Con came back. And it was really, really cool. It was a really amazing experience. And he is one of those that is just as nice as you read his tweets or his Instagram or what he's like on other interviews as well.
He was great, and I am so thankful that I got that opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome.
And that I get to know someone who is a comic book historian. Which is the coolest sounding title I think I've ever heard. So for anybody who has never heard of this, what does a comic book historian do?
So a comic book historian is kind of I wouldn't say a catch-all, but some people will do like romance comics historian or mystery comics historian or horror. But definitely all of us fall under a comic book historian. I do things more internationally. So I also know like manhwa and like manga and comics that come from Africa, South America, Australia. But what we do is not only do we do a lot of research and a lot of history, because history is in its name, we also need to understand the trends and the ebbs and flow of how we see comics have evolved over time, not just the story and the characters, the writers, all of the creative team, but also how it reflects pop culture in general. In the 80s, Iron Man Demon in a Bottle was really big because we were going through alcoholism, like drunk driving, MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, all that. And, we had a lot of characters go through a lot of like drug addiction and withdrawal. Fictional characters. It's because at the time we were big on going against drugs and the opium addiction. So there's a lot of things that are just also a reflection of our current state. And that is a lot of what a comic book historian does, is that we have to cover a little bit of everything, because there are also people who are pop psychologists who know comic books, so they understand the psychology of the characters, but doesn't necessarily mean they know the history, but they know enough history to know how that character's mindset has changed. So we all kind of do a little bit of everything, but a comic book historian kind of we have to know a little bit of, we're like the jack of all trades, but master of all, unfortunately.
So what does a typical day look like for you working with this industry?
So a lot for me is I wake up and after I try to have breakfast, I'm trying to do better. I didn't have breakfast during Comic-Con, but I tried.
Nobody eats during Comic-Con.
I tried. And then what you do is, for me, I go through all of the news and the announcements that have been made. And a lot of it also happens to be DC and Marvel, just because they're the main two big publishers. But I also want to concentrate on everything that is international. So I'll go through and I'll Google search and put up alerts for almost every country name. There's about I think 204 countries according to the UN. I'm not so sure. Don't quote me on that number. I could be wrong. And then I would write comics, comic art, or manga, something like that. And then I would see every hit that has. And some comics are new. They're only announcing it. So they're we are not coming out till September later of this year. So I'll make a mental note of when that comes out, whether in English or whether in their native language. But if it is English, I try to keep a note of it and I try to make sure I order it. Or if I can't, because I always want to support the publishers. And if not, you can always message their media team and be like, this is something I want to learn and cover. If they like to, they'll send you an advanced copy. It's mostly digital now. They don't send hard copies anymore. It's too expensive in the mail and things get lost. And then that way I can be able to read and understand the story and the characters if it's ongoing. And if it's new, learn a little bit more about the creative team. So a lot of my day is actually research and a lot of categorizing things and folders and Excel sheets and documents on my laptop. I also look for interviews for all of the creative team. And some of them are new and some of them are older. I've already seen what Grant Morrison is like interviewing, but I'll see if he has anything to say about that particular new comic. But if not, I don't really have to look him up. But if it's somebody completely new, then I'll try to see what they're like in interviews and what they're saying about their book. Because there's a lot of promotion before the actual item comes out. I also check Kickstarter for anything that comes out because Kickstarter and Patreon is a great place. So a lot of my day is sedentary and a lot of research and a lot of reading up.
So for a lot of people, reading comics all day sounds like it would be a joy. Just okay, my job is to read comics. What are some of the challenges that you face that are because every job has its challenges. What are some of the challenges of this particular job?
I think there's two main ones. One is you just don't have enough time in the day to get to everything because you do have to do other things like try to cook, to have breakfast, see family, go to a convention. And at a convention, I try to find new emerging artists and books. But you just don't have enough time to read everything. So every reader has a to-read pile that you hope to get to. You always have more books than you have time with. And that's one of the challenges because somebody whom you don't know will be like, oh, have you read this and that? And you'll be like, it's on my list. I haven't read it yet. If they're lovely, they're like, it's so good. I hope you get to it. If they're not lovely people, they're like, I'm surprised. For a historian, you haven't got to it yet. But we all kind of have our own things. And the other is definitely trying to get a hold of a copy. Because if it's international based, it's harder to get in the States, or they'll message you and say, it's actually not going to be in English. We don't know when it's going to come out in English. So what I've done is I'll use a language translator app. I'll try to get the book anyways in that native language, and then I just scan it on through the camera of my iPhone and then read it that way.
That's fascinating.
Because I like hard copy. I mean, I do read digital, but I prefer hard copy. I'm literally scanning line by line.
That's so fascinating. It's not something you would normally think about when you think of comics.
Yeah.
That you would need a translator for it. That's really cool. You're here at Comic-Con.
Yes.
Doing panels about comics. And
yes.
You had a whole bunch this year. Kind of talk about what some of those were and what the main points and takeaway from those panels became.
I think more than anything, it's about educating people who don't know, but in a kind and humorous way. Because workshops are great, but also nobody wants to sit at a panel and be lectured at. We're not back at school. So I put together panels, for example, We have the Forgotten Trio, which is my staple every year and kind of my baby. And it's a spotlight on letterers, inkers, and colorists, because a lot of people don't know exactly who they are or what exactly that they do, because they're not always credited in a lot of comic book reviews. But it's getting better, because some people don't know that the final product that we get, the writer doesn't do the lettering. I know writing is words, but they're not the letterer of the comic. Just like an artist is a catch-all phrase, they're actually sometimes the penciler. And you have an inker that traces, and you have a colorist that puts it in. So it's actually 3 or 4 different people. But artist is such a catch-all phrase that they think it's just one person. So a lot of it is shedding more insight into what they do, but also to answer questions for those who already know what those jobs are, and they want to know what it takes to break into the industry. And the 2 other ones that really come to mind is I had humor in comics. Are they still needed? Which I hope the answer is yes, because we need humor in life.
Always need
always.
The humor.
And humor is one of those really subjective things. I was an Eisner judge last year. And for those who don't know, Eisner's is basically the Academy Award equivalent for comic books. And one of the categories is humor. But humor is so subjective. Like, how do you judge that? And especially in the last couple years, humor has become kind of divided and controversial. So I had a lot of amazing, wonderful. One, Lonnie Millsap is from The New Yorker, and we have Keith Knight, who, due to a double strike, I will say he is from a show that you recognize on a streaming service. So please look it up. Keith Knight, but he's also known for like the K Chronicles and the Nightlife. He was Comic-Con special guest this year. So they really know a lot about humor and what's needed. And we have Jim Thompson, who's another fellow comics historian, who has seen the ebb and flow, because this is the first time in our year Mad Magazine doesn't exist. And Mad Magazine was known as kind of the humor-based comic for everyone. So we talked about how humor has evolved in comics, and the explosion of web comics online, like Sarah Anderson. Club Cryptid was nominated this year for humor, and she was nominated as like a writer-artist combo. And hers is very wholesome and very self-reflective. And she went viral because it was funny, but also reflected what we were thinking. And it's kind of like where people can understand why we still need humor in comics, because people get comics, they think of comedian, which is humor, or they think of comics, but also for creators who want to get in and they want to create something funny, and they would ask Lonnie and Keith, how do I do this without being, lack of a better term, canceled? And how do I handle trolls? So we talked about that in comics. And I was fortunate enough this year to be invited onto, the Asians Built the Comics Market, where I got to sit with some amazing people. We have the first Afghan comic creator, Gazelle Omar, I believe is her last name. She does artillery. Look up Artillery Comics. She's on there. Rick Hernandez was our moderator, and I got to sit next to Janice Chang, who is a letterer for over 30 years. She is Asian American, but she's also female, which is why people somehow are discovering her now through social media. But she's actually been there for a long time, and she's actually one of this year's Inkpot Award winners and is a Comic-Con special guest. And it was really wonderful to listen to her talk, because again, she agreed on the Spotlight Forgotten Trio panel that letterers don't always get remembered. And she was so excited that her name is now on the front page of comics, and spelled correctly, by the way. So she was talking about kind of what it means to do her job, but also not be a pioneer in what she does, as one of the first Asian American female to do comics lettering for over 30 years. So I was fortunate enough to be on that panel as a speaker, as opposed to moderating and producing it. So there was a lot more comic-centric panels this year, as you and I were talking about earlier.
Yeah, with all of the strikes that are going on, Comic-Con
Yes.
this year has been very different.
Yes.
What does it mean to you to see the attention go away from Hollywood and back to comics at a Comic-Con?
I find it very interesting. I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's a pop culture event, and people come for all of their own reasons. So if you're sad that the studios are not here, I get it. And I hope that they can return one day as well. I hope that there's a peaceful ending to the double strikes in the studios. But I do see that there is a lot more concentration on the floor, on the exhibit floor, of people checking out comics, going to different comic vendors and major publishers, and buying things and looking at things. That's just from my observation. I don't know retailer numbers of how well they did, but I also did see a focus on comic book panels. And it is called Comic-Con. So a lot of people I know felt relief that it kind of went back to a more, while a lot of people, they did feel it was a more intimate time. They can actually meet writers and artists that they want to. However, I know that there are some that there's an overlap. They want to do the studios, they want to go to Hall H, and they want to meet, Jeff Smith from Bone or something. But they were only able to do one and not the other. So they're able to spend more of their time maybe looking at other things on the floor. So I feel more than anything, it's very interesting, and I'm still marinating on my experience because I looked at people's faces. They weren't angry. Like, there's still a lot of really happy people there. I think they're just happy that we have something, especially after a really tough couple of years.
Despite the popularity of comic books, there are still some people who kind of don't think it matters. How do comics and like manga, graphic novels kind of impact culture and culture impact comics?
Yes, so I do believe it is very important, not just for my own bias, to really love comics and manga, because more shows and films than you realize are actually based off of them. That is the source material that a lot of studios find very interesting and turn it into the shows that you like to watch on multiple streamers or on TV. And there's also kind of an impact. For example, Zom 100 is a humor-based zombie graphic novel. I mean, it's a manga, actually. However, it kind of zombie love has always been there, but it also resurges and grows. So there is also a vice versa aspect, because if people really love zombies, an artist out there might be like, oh, I have a new idea for a manga on a new take that's a little bit more hilarious. Zombies seem to be the trend. And then on the other way, if something is really great, like Spy Family started out as a manga and people loved it, they've now turned it into an anime, which gives us something to watch maybe during the last couple years of hard times, or something to relax to. So I do see that they both kind of have an impact on each other, and it's really important to support all arts or as much different mediums as you can, because they eventually also become video games. Like Dragon Ball and Naruto became video games. So you have more and more different ways to enjoy it because there's a love for it and it kind of flows down.
Why should people care what's going on in comics and that comic books need historians?
I think it's very important to care about what happens in comics because it also reflects on what people are feeling in society. Sometimes you don't want to say it out loud, but then when you read it in a comic, whether it's Sarah's scribbles or whether it is in one of the Black Panther books, you're like, this character is saying exactly how I'm feeling and how I'm thinking. The writer just the writer and the creative team put it to page, but you've never felt comfortable saying it out loud. However, you feel reflected and seen when you read it, and you say to yourself, oh, this is exactly society's problem, or this is exactly how I feel as the only, ethnic person in this, city that I live in. Even though the character is fictional, but you feel like you have somebody to connect to. Because sometimes you don't want to tell people that in real life, or you don't want to put it out on social media. The other thing as well is comic historians kind of keep a record of things. So there were a lot of people that said, I do not like Captain America for getting very political, and I don't like Superman for getting very political. I like them to just have old-fashioned fun. I was like, but Captain America punched Nazis in the original Golden Age. Do you know what I mean? Like in his beginning, and Superman always fought against evil. One of the current books that kind of came out, not current, but Jean Luen Yang did it. It was Superman versus the Klan. So politics were always there, and sometimes it helps to have historians. I would fact check. and say, we're not saying that you are completely wrong. We're just saying maybe you've forgotten this is what it was. Maybe for new comic book readers, I say, I didn't realize there was so much politics in it, and now I'm interested and I want to go back and read some. So I think it really helps, and it also helps that if somebody says, my child is on the spectrum, are there books my child can read? Are there any comics my child could feel seen? And we can say, yes, we can be able to recommend certain ones for you.
What is it that you love about comics?
No other medium combines pictures and words. There are wordless comics, those like Corgi, those are great. However, I love the idea that no other medium combines pictures and words in a sequential format like that. That you can be able to get, for me, the best of both worlds. Even with sound effects, you don't actually hear it like music is, but you can hear it in your mind. So I find comics really fascinating because it combines so many of the great aspects of other mediums, and they put it together into one format.
How did you become a comic book historian? Maybe there's someone watching that's like, this sounds like a great job. How do I get into it? How did it happen for you, and how does someone go about doing that now?
You know, I think it's a little bit different for everybody. You know, for me, I started reading and collecting comics when I was 3. I was an early reader. And there are actually not many, I would say growing number of universities and schools that have comic studies either as a minor, a concentration, a bachelor's, or even like a master's of literary, or even a PhD. University of Dundee out in the United Kingdom is one of them. And you can do that in an academic format, which is similar to something that I had followed. However, if you don't, because I understand college is very expensive, something that I find very important is to get to know people that are actually in the comics industry, because they're going to be the ones that are going to help you out, put down the ladder, and lift you up to the next ladder. Most people are very kind and nice. They're not going to say, I'm not going to help you. I don't not care about comics history. I'm like, but you're a writer. You are part of the history. They are willing to kind of guide you and help you out. And so that's something that I did. A lot of the people that I've met, I got to meet my heroes that way. And they were able to not only give me the time of day by saying, yes, I'll do an interview with you, or yes, I can tell you more about my background of how I got into it, because everything you learn is part of your knowledge base and part of history. So a lot of the things I also tell people is you want to, and now anybody can do it, but also always fact check yourself. You can start a new site or blog and start keeping account, because people want to see that you know it. A lot of people will just say, I am this or that, but they don't necessarily have the expertise, not even expertise and experience, because if you're 25, you only have so much experience, but to show that you actually know what you're talking about, and the willingness that if there's a gentle correction to be like, oh, okay, I didn't know, or that was like a small gap in my knowledge, and then correct that publicly on your site or on social media. And also getting to know people to have you be a guest to speak on their panels. And the reason why that's important is you're being seen by everyone. So when you say something wrong, someone's going to remember. So that's a moment to show that you actually really do know history and you know everything. And it helps to be part of Facebook groups like People's History of Comics, I'm so sorry. It's by Jim Thompson. It's like People's History of Comics. I will have to give you the correct name afterwards if you ever want to link it. But Jim Thompson is great. And he lets in comics historians, and we can all talk, bond, and also lift each other up, and also trade knowledge. Because like I said earlier, some people are romance comics experts. Some people are underground comics experts. So you want to be able to gain and kind of get to know. And if they're on a panel, and they're like, oh, I'm a romance comics expert, but they need someone that is a Marvel historian. I know someone. They'll reach out to you, and then you can be put onto that panel. So a lot of it is building expertise and credentials for yourself, but also proving that you actually know it. And that's what I did.
So the last question we always ask, because this is literary hype, what books are you hyped about?
Okay, the number one that actually made me scream out loud when I was on either I was in the hotel room or the exhibit floor, was my co-host for my podcast, Chris Eaton. He showed me a Godzilla and Kong versus the Justice League story arcs limited series that's coming out. And I love crossovers. There are people who are like, this is stupid, but there's something for everyone. If you don't like it, don't read it. But for me, I love this. I think it's great. That's the fun.
Sounds fantastic.
That's the fun of comics. It's kind of the silliness or the seriousness of it, or maybe a mixture of both. And I'm really excited. I believe it comes out maybe later this year, but it's written by Brian Buccellato. And he is a wonderful person. If you ever meet him, he's really friendly. He's really great. And so I was very excited to see someone that I know and recognize writing for it. And it's going to be a Legendary Publishing and DC Comics crossover. And I cannot wait. I am very, very hyped and very excited because I'm also a huge Godzilla person. I'm a Godzilla fan. So and Kong, I love Kong over the years. It's taken some time, but I do love this large primate. Yes, because it was in a preview. It was in like a collected previews, like free catalog. You know, DC will be like, this is what we have coming out. So all I saw was the cover of the preview, and I just started screaming.
Splendid. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about all sorts of comics. Thank you so much
for asking me.
This is such a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Jessica for taking the time out of her very busy San Diego Comic-Con schedule to talk with me about the importance of comic books in our culture. I mean, she had several panels with very different topics, so she had a lot going on, and I really appreciate her taking the time to sit down and chat with me. Don't forget to hit that like button down below, and of course, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Until next time, I'll see you later.